Hey folks, it's Barb, a coming out coach at Lotus Community Coaching and Authentically Us, a community for late blooming lesbians. I am so excited to let you know that we have a ton of great stuff coming up for you in the month of April, in addition to our regularly scheduled support groups that happen over on Authentically Us. First up, new event on April the 3rd, Dealing with Negativity. That is facilitated by Anne-Marie Zanzal, and this will deal with the negativity that we may experience during the coming out process, and also negativity that may come from internally, from our inner critics. Our next session will be on Thursday, April 10th, and this is for individuals who are healing after the end of a catalyst relationship. Of course, catalyst relationships are very powerful in that they change our lives rapidly and can be accompanied with a lot of joy, but are also uniquely painful when they end. So I encourage anyone who is suffering from the end of a catalyst relationship, please attend. I will be facilitating that group session. And Anne-Marie will be facilitating a session on spirituality and faith in the coming out journey. And this is for anyone who would like a little assistance in deconstructing their faith and reconstructing in such a way that, and reclaiming their spirituality in a way that affirms your sexual identity. That's on Thursday, April the 17th. On Thursday, April 24th, I will be facilitating a dating workshop for late blooming lesbians and for any lesbian who has not dated in a really long time or who has never dated women before. So we will be going through some education, some stuff about online dating, looking for red flags, green flags, etc., and that will be, I'll be able to take your questions with that one as well. Really looking forward to helping you daters step out and jump into the dating pool. And lastly, on Tuesday, April the 29th, we have a speed friending event. And this is for our Authentically Us members to come on in. Let's do a little speed friending, kind of like speed dating. And who knows, maybe you'll be making new connections, new friendships that with people who are a lot like you and who understand your journey. So once again, Authentically Us, it's our support community for women who are coming out or have come out or are about to come out later in life. And this subscription is monthly, but you can try your first week at Authentically Us for free. Please join us. We have a lot of great stuff happening in the month of April. We'll see you in Authentically Us at Mighty Networks. Hey, queer friends and allies. Welcome to Season 6 of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hey, this is Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hey, it's Barbara Rowlandson. How you doing?
And we are back for another episode of Coming Out and Beyond. We are enjoying this season so very much because you know how we're working this? We are addressing the concerns that we see in our community and the people we coach over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so today's episode is about what we see a lot in our community. And what is that, Ms. Rowlandson?
Well, it's this idea of that we must suffer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That suffering is somehow a necessary component of being a good person.
Right. And they also, I think a lot of us, and we're going to say ourselves too, when Barb and I are talking about this, it's not something that we haven't done ourselves. This comes from really hard won experience for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is, I believe, an unconscious piece in us, which is in our subconscious, that believes that we should suffer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that's cultivated into us from birth, basically.
Yeah. And, you know, I also want to recognize that suffering is a part of life and that it is. And then, according to Buddhism, is when you're able to let go, attachment causes suffering. And when you're able to let go, that is when you decrease your suffering. So I do want to acknowledge some of those teachings. But there also is within our community this beating myself with a wet noodle thing. We find that folks over and over and over again really really help me out, Barb.
I
What would you?
think they hang on to the idea of suffering. They
Correct.
really cling on to it, and it's a very, very hard notion to let go of.
Hmm.
And I think why we're doing this podcast today is because we're curious about why do the women we work with so tenaciously hang on to suffering.
And I don't think Barb and I have all the answers to this question. We are not philosophers, but we have been wondering have you ever felt like happiness had to be earned after enough pain? Now, I would love to share an anecdote about. As many listeners of this show know, I had an estrangement from my child last year. And of course, I had all kinds of feelings around this and all kinds of grief. The suffering I felt around this was, after coming out, was probably the hardest suffering that I've ever had since then. Towards the middle of all of this, I started to say to myself, I don't want to feel like this anymore. Because, like a lot of parents that go through estrangement, there's all this questioning. And that's where the cognitive dissonance kicked in, because what happened is that my child was not speaking to me, but I had done everything right. And I also have three other children that I have a very healthy relationships with. This child and we are mending, but things are never going to be the same again. And what I realized is I don't have to hold on to this suffering to prove that I am a good mother,
Mhm.
because I know I'm a good mom. I know that. I know that 100% about that myself. And I also want to acknowledge, like, how we define a good mom is problematic. Let me rephrase this. I am a compassionate and caring and loving mom. I'm not going to use good. I'm a compassionate, caring, loving mom and now a grandma. And I know that I am. So whether one of my children chooses to speak to me or not has nothing to do with my abilities as a parent. That is their journey, and that is something they're going on themselves. So it was towards the middle of last year, the middle of all that. I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be beating myself up. I don't want to be grieving anymore. And slowly, over the course of several months, I was able to come out of the fog. So it was about from January of 2023 to December to 2023. So about a year. And that's when I learned I'm not going to make myself suffer anymore. I want joy in my life. And whether my child talks to me or not is not going to affect the joy that I feel in my life.
To me, it feels like to choose to continue to feel suffering over this relationship. It's like having a laser focus on one thing. And when you choose not to suffer, it's like you zoomed out and got the bigger picture of your life.
That is such an incredibly good metaphor, Barb. Thank you. I chose not to make that my focus of my life anymore. And I zoomed out and said, I have so many other wonderful pieces of my life. And it was really funny because when I let go, that's when they came back into my life. Now, let me just say that was the universe working, because we were not talking to each other for almost a year. That was the universe working. I hadn't reached out to them or anything like that. And
Right.
I needed to be also in partnership with my own healing and my own feeling of joy. Do you have a story about that, Barb?
I think that we get suffering messages about suffering and the worthiness of suffering in all aspects of life. And one for me was through diet culture. As someone who's had like weight has yo-yoed up and down my entire life, messages about my value that are directly connected to my body and what size it is and my behaviors around food and eating. I mean, the messages around the virtue of self-deprivation, to be told multiple and multiple times over and over again that you just have to accept being hungry. I actually, as recently as last year, had a doctor tell me that I should consider any food that isn't a vegetable to be a treat. I'm sorry. Can we put a language disclaimer on this episode? Can we not see how truly fucked up that messaging is? That to be able, like, to say that you to be worthy and to have a better life have to consider all food basically to be a treat. It's screwed up. These messages about that we get about what we have to endure, or working out past the point of pain, for example. Pain is just weakness leaving your body. There's like these stupid athletic memes and messages about what it means to endure pain and endure suffering. No, I'm sorry. Pain is your body's warning system, and it's not even your early body's warning system. It's your late warning system. It's your emergency warning. Stop. But we're told to keep going and to keep going and to keep going. And
Push through the pain, push
and
through the pain.
push through the hunger, push through the pain. And it's like, why are we expected to hurt ourselves to fit a mold of femininity that I had no say in? It's not what I would maybe naturally consider to be what is attractive. When I think of women who I am attracted to, by the way, attraction's so subjective. Like, I'm attracted to butch women. They are still feminine, but they embody the butchness. It doesn't make them any less womanly.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to support what you're saying about diet culture. And could be a whole nother podcast.
Mhm.
But Tanda has been on Ozempic lately, and I have been doing a semaglutide. And I've lost 30 pounds since August, and Tanda's lost about 20. She started in like late December. And my sister, who is a diabetic, is on Ozempic as well. And she has had lost about 30 pounds. And what is really interesting is that we're amazed at the weight loss, but we're amazed that we're having the weight loss without suffering. You know, we are having that weight loss without, isn't that effed up? So why do we internalize the belief that suffering is necessary? Well, number one, we teach women to endure and sacrifice, whether in relationships, careers, or caregiving.
Mhm.
How many times have we heard that phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, no pain, no gain? So,
Mhm.
what message is about suffering were you taught growing up, Barb? And our listeners, we really would love for this. If you watch this on YouTube, to please interact with us, because we really want to dig into this
Mhm.
over the next couple of months and maybe years. What are some of the messages you have received about suffering?
I think we can't talk about the idea of suffering without acknowledging culturally that suffering has been held up as the ultimate act of love. And all you need to do is to go into any church where there's a cross with a man nailed to it in torture.
Hmm.
And that image for me, I don't think I always thought about it, but I have come to become deeply disturbed by it. And I'm sorry if this offends Christians, but to me, it is someone who's being tortured.
Well, as you know, I'm an ordained minister. And I grew up with that image. Now, so some people don't know this. So in some traditions, especially the Orthodox and Catholic, it's the crucifix. Jesus is on the cross on an
Mhm.
instrument of torture. And in some Christian churches, they no longer have Jesus on the cross because that reflects his death. They have the empty cross, which reflects the resurrection. So there's a little theology behind that.
Well, sure.
But but about 10 years ago, I realized that the cross was an instrument of torture. And I was like, I'm not going to wear an instrument of torture around my neck anymore. I'm not going to wear a crucifix on my neck where a man is being tortured and suffering around me. And also, that is the basis of Christianity, which is Jesus died for our sins. So Jesus suffered for our sins. So the martyrdom in Christianity is very, very, and I remember when I was reading Carl Jung in seminary, and he was talking about archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
And this has really messed with my faith for a while, because every civilization has an archetype in which someone suffers, someone dies, tortured, and suffers,
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa, for the good of the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I read that, I was like, my goodness, the archetype of Christianity is that. And then because my kids grew up during Harry Potter time, that was Harry Potter's story. He
Totally.
dies for his community. He comes back to life, but he dies for his community. And so when we start to realize that we have been fed these messages forever, whether it's a religious institution
Mm-hmm.
or our society in general, the great martyr, it is so ingrained that we suffer.
I would say, even if you look back to, if we want to take the religious element out of it, if you look at the Stoics in Greek philosophy, they too were all about, you know what, suffering is a path to wisdom. Acceptance of suffering is a path to inner peace. That also models Buddhism, which you referred to earlier.
Mhm.
Like the Buddha did a whole lot of suffering as well, and
Yeah.
gained enlightenment through it, right? So I think like there is this sort of, it speaks to the human experience that as we go through life, things happen, we suffer, and then we make meaning out of our suffering and gain something out of it, some wisdom.
And we are not supposed to stay there. We are not supposed to stay there and do 8 million mea culpas because we want to stay in the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we feel like we have done something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or we feel guilty about some changes we made in our life, then we feel that we need to stay there and suffer because we need to pay our penance for wanting something different.
Mm-hmm. And the more we suffer, the better we are, or the more loving we are, or the more of a good girl we are.
Right. And I don't want to talk about religion for all of this, but women are taught all of those, especially women that are taught complementarianism, which is often out of the more conservative faith traditions, that there's God, and then there's the husband, and then there's the woman as the heads of the household. And so women are taught that if they hang in there, women they can also, in some of these conservative churches, get beaten by their husband, yet they're not given permission to leave, that they have to sacrifice for their family. They have to be obedient to any male. And it reinforces the idea that suffering will lead to redemption in the next life, or it will make you more worthy for God's love. Woo.
Wow, yeah,
Now,
right.
this is really, really deep. And so, what if you could be worthy of love without suffering?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that is the hard thing to wrap your mind around if you've been conditioned from day one that suffering is an essential part of, like, component of goodness. So,
And suffering is part of joy. Like, you have to suffer to be able to have joy.
yes. Yeah. So the idea that we are just, by virtue of being born, that we are worthy of, having love without suffering, feeling love without suffering, allowing ourselves maybe the grace that, we are imperfect, all of us. And we teach this all the time, right? Is that self-kindness is a really important piece of eliminating suffering. And it's one of the hardest pieces, I think, for our crew. to accept.
Right, because we also have been awashed in heteronormative expectations, right?
Hmm.
And this can amplify all of this because it makes our desire, our thirst for authenticity often feel wrong or selfish. Because, compulsory heteronormativity, we talk about this all the time. It's about how we spend years, men and women, spend years trying to fit this mold. And we believe that staying in unhappy marriages or denying our true self is the price that we have to pay.
Hmm. Hmm. And we're told it's normal,
Right.
right? It's hard to be married to a man. Marriage is hard.
Yes.
Men are just like that.
Right.
So these are the kinds of things that we are told and taught and then tell ourselves.
Well, we're told that our relationships with men are hard. I mean, we're told from the beginning. Like
Mm-hmm.
when we're dating, when we're 14 or 15, we're told, oh, that's men, boys are hard. We just have to learn to live with them and all these things like that. And, the thing is when we keep trying to make something work, when we feel so alone and just not complete,
Mm-hmm.
we may have periods of joy and be okay with things, but I am going to guarantee you all of this will come back. It'll come back. It keeps
Absolutely.
coming back. It keeps
It's
coming back.
it's a recurring theme for women, whether you're straight or not.
Hmm.
It's just going to keep coming back. If I had a dime for every time a straight woman said to me, I wish I was gay because, life with men is so hard, or it's too bad I like being with men so much because they're terrible in every other regard. Like, I would be a rich woman.
Well, and also too, we've been focusing a lot about shame and guilt on this podcast and in some of the handouts we've done. And another role that really another way of thinking about things is another reason why we really struggle with shame and guilt, because we acknowledge how shame about our identity can create a belief that happiness must be earned after living inauthentically.
Mm-hmm.
How
Mm-hmm.
shame about identity can create a belief that happiness must be earned after living authentically. What do I mean, Barb?
Okay. Okay. So let me reply to that with this question. Have you ever felt like you needed to make up for being your true self?
Yes. Have you? Now I'm thinking about that in the terms of my son when I moved away. And there was a lot of reasons when I moved away. He was 16 at the time and he was living with his dad. And I, s- even though it nearly killed me, I went up there every 3 to 4 weeks and spent a week with him. And also because my ex was very, very uncooperative, I had to rent an Airbnb so I could spend. So it cost me an enormous amount of money, which is okay. I don't mind spending that. But I had to be true to myself. I had to go live in a new place. And a lot of times when people come out later in life or come out, they often move. And I just needed to do that for myself. But I did a lot of running around trying to make it up to him. That was more about me than it was
Right.
about yet
Yeah.
him. So I felt that my desire to have a bit of a fresh start, to live with the woman I loved because she could not move to me because her mother was very ill at that and has since passed. I felt like I needed to do things over the top.
Hmm.
And, and consequently, it caused a lot of stress.
Sure.
And it
I can
also
see that.
caused a lot of guilt because I was always not measuring up to a standard that I had set for myself when I was living with my son full time. And it caused me a lot of pain. And probably somewhere subconsciously, I realized that I was trying to earn the new life I created.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is the price of being happy with the woman you love, is that you have to high step it and spend a lot of money and, you know, just do this whole routine
Mhm.
that really costs you time, effort, energy, money, all
And
of those things.
also too, I would go up to see my son, and then my ex-husband was made it very difficult for me to see him.
Mhm.
So it it was just a basically, frankly, a shit show.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, on the other side of this, now this is like 6 years later, my son and I have a wonderful relationship.
Mhm.
And he's one of my biggest fans and biggest supporters, and I truly love this kid to the moon and back. But I felt that I needed to suffer, I
Mhm.
believe, because I was doing something wrong by moving away from him.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of messages about what it means to be a good mom and what it means to be a good wife, and, those things usually don't involve prioritizing yourself.
Right. And I was experiencing guilt over breaking norms, right?
Mhm.
Even though I had come out, even though I had sought divorce and stuff like that, the norm that a mother always gives up her life for her children
Mhm.
was very still really embedded in me.
Mhm.
It was embedded in me. So I had all this guilt about leaving my marriage, changing family dynamics,
Mhm.
and by disappointing others by living authentically. I had all that shame and guilt. I don't anymore, but I did. And one of the things that I have really, really leaned into, and I do talk to this about the women we work with all the time, is that two things can be true at once.
Oh my gosh, the great
Yes.
revelation of my 40s,
Yes.
that two opposite things can exist in the same space and be true.
It's okay to grieve your old life when you're stepping into a new one and experiencing the joy that you're feeling in this new life as somebody who's finally accepting or discovering their identity. And it is okay to grieve that your marriage. Some
Yes.
of us, I mean, before this all happened with my ex, I mean, I grieved my relationship with him. He was my best friend. I mean, that's gone now, but he was my very best friend. We had a great love based on the mutual love we had for our children. We got along great. We had about 10 years where we really got along. We didn't fight. We got along really, really well. And in that beginning, I was grieving that too.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I was falling in love for the first time in my life.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was having sex with the right person for my sexual orientation for the
Mhm.
first time in my life. I was discovering a community that I felt myself in
Right.
and comfortable in, that I didn't have to pretend or what I want endure some relationships, which I often did with the straight women that I were friends with, not because they're bad people or anything like that. It's just that we had different lenses on which we looked at the world. And
Exactly.
even though I was in a heteronormative marriage, my lens was still queer.
I would echo that.
Mhm.
For sure. I would echo that. Like, my lens was still queer, and it was there for a long time, and it's like hindsight's 2020, right? If you look back and you see, "Oh, how did I miss this sign? How did I miss this sign?" Like, part of that was, I was always so comfortable in queer spaces,
Huh?
and
Mhm.
I was the best ally, the greatest ally ever.
Right. We're so to recap, we believe that suffering is necessary, right? Whether we get it from religion or compulsory heteronormativity. We believe the role of shame and guilt in suffering. And then there's the brain stuff. With our cognitive dissonance. What we mean by cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort we feel when our actions don't align with our beliefs.
Right.
So, how does suffering become a comfort zone?
Well, suffering makes it feel safer, I think.
Mhm.
I think the struggle is familiar and becomes the safer option. And when the struggle is normalized, as it is for women, right, then it becomes the safer choice for us. We don't have to put ourselves in danger. We might have to suffer in our comfort zone, but at least we know what to expect. At least we understand the rules of staying here.
Right. So the women that we work with often have come from a chaotic childhood
Hmm.
or a chaotic marriage.
Yes.
So they're very used to suffering.
Hmm.
It is, and so, but their suffering is in their comfort zone. So now, wait a minute, you're saying, wait a minute, how can suffering be my comfort zone? What we mean by comfort zone is it's the place where we're familiar and it's expected. So if we have lived a life where we've experienced a lot of suffering and then we come out and then the suffering heats up again, it's familiar and expected because we have lived this way for a long time.
Hmm.
And it goes to that old saying, it's dysfunction, but it's our dysfunction.
Right.
And we're comfortable with it.
Right.
So I have to ask the question then, does it feel safer to stay in struggle because ease feels unfamiliar?
That's an excellent question.
It's a truth
Um,
bomb. That's a mic drop.
yeah. Yeah. It's an excellent question. Is ease feels unfamiliar, so you don't trust it.
Right. And as somebody who has moved from a straight relationship to a queer relationship, learning to trust the ease of my relationship with my wife has been a really hard thing for me because I was used to the discomfort of my relationship. Let me provide you an example. My relationship with my ex husband, now, not all women feel this way. A lot of the women we work with do, not all women feel this way. But I often spent a lot of my energy and a lot of my time wondering whether I should leave that marriage. Way before I acknowledged my queerness. Way years. I mean, and even though I would put it away for a while, it would come back. So I was always wondering whether I should leave that marriage. And now, when I am now married to my wife, do you know what, Barb? I never think about that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Know that what that provides me? More space in my brain to do other things.
Right.
And so feeling this ease within my marriage is probably the biggest gift I've ever given to myself.
Well, sure. It allows you to spend that energy that you otherwise would have spent ruminating over should I, shouldn't I, should I leave?
Hmm.
What's wrong? What's wrong with me? Okay, all of that energy's gone. And would you say like it's made you I want to the first term that comes up in my mind is like a higher performing person, but I'm not sure that's what I want to use. But would you say it's made your life better in other areas of your life that's not related to marriage, relationships, or sexuality?
It has made me an all around more compassionate person.
Okay, say more about that.
Because I have become, I understand suffering, but I also know that it is not a place I'm supposed to live in.
Mhm.
So I am able to see when other people suffer, which is something that I always was able to do. But instead of having judgment on why or why not people are suffering, I don't have any judgment about it anymore.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
just feel compassion.
Mhm.
I just feel sad that sometimes, and it's also too, I also have like lost my codependent nature in the sense is that people are in charge of their own suffering. And until you want to make a change or change this pattern in your life, I can be supportive of you. I can provide you resources. I can provide you a space to do that, but I cannot do that for you.
Right. Right.
And what I learned from all of this too is that I am allowed to feel safe and happy without proving my worth because I just said it in the statement before. I am safe and happy, and I don't have to prove my worth to you by trying to fix you or by trying to make things better for you.
Mhm.
That is your job to do, and that is not my job to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't have to prove my worth to anybody anymore. And
Yeah.
I have really, that's another thing besides the compassion piece. Before when I would meet people, I would often, slip in some of my accomplishments and stuff like that. I don't do that anymore. I just don't.
You don't have
because
anything to prove.
I don't have anything to prove. I just don't. And sometimes it feels a little weird because I see, like, I'm not the snazziest dresser. I walk around in, leggings and big t-shirts, and I see how I get treated based on how I look.
Mhm,
And I just sort of think it's funny now. I don't have to prove to anybody who I am.
mhm.
And then when I do say something, people are often surprised because I look like
The liberty of stepping outside of that
a Mhm,
and not having to reach that high bar,
mhm,
that has been like one of the greatest joys and gifts to me of not just coming out, but also getting a little bit older. And it's like, okay, when you step outside of the fixed stare of approval and masculine approval, and you go and you step outside of that, it's like, all right, now I get to just be me on my terms.
which
And
is
I don't
wonderful.
I don't have to care what you think. That's fine because I don't need you to care.
Right. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's sometimes it's quite funny to me when men realize that they don't have that power over you anymore. They don't know
Mhm.
what to do. They're like, wow, I've tried insulting her and it didn't work. It's like, okay.
So, this episode today is we're really trying to challenge the narrative that happiness is a reward after enough suffering, or joy is not something you have to earn. It's something we are all inherently worthy of.
Yes, yes, it is. We are born worthy,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Do we ask little kids to prove themselves? Do we
Right.
ask a baby?
I'm thinking of my newborn grandson. We just take care of him. We haven't asked him, "Hey, are you worthy of our love or care?" We haven't asked him, "Are you a deserving soul?" He is a deserving soul. He is worthy of
True.
our love and care because he simply exists.
Exactly. And so do you and I and every single one of us here. We're all that baby. We all
Mhm.
deserve, we were just born worthy of being happy, being joyful. And that's part of our shared humanity.
Correct. It's part of our shared common humanity. And what I would like to ask you, and I want you to consider this, dear listeners, what would life look like if joy was the default, not the reward?
Hmm.
What would life look like if you allowed yourself to live in joy and not only allow yourself to feel joy when you think you've earned it or when we think we've suffered enough?
I think that may be something that's even like very difficult for a lot of our listeners to even
Mhm.
conceptualize.
Say more about
So if you've never known it, it's hard to know what it would look like.
that. Mhm.
And so, don't be overwhelmed by this question. I think it's important to think about it even in small increments
Mhm.
and making a gradual shift towards that realization and letting go because we can't just unring the bell, right? We've had
Right.
years of conditioning, years and years, decades of
We've had,
conditioning.
Barb and I fall into our conditioning all the time, and we catch each other sometimes. We both challenge each other sometimes because, it's we've been conditioned for I've been conditioned for 62 years, 61. What am I? 61 years. And Barb's been conditioned for 50 years. I mean, like, we've been conditioned for a long time.
Yeah,
And
it
so
takes
it's
time.
really, really normal. Like, just think of this as a practice.
Mhm.
It is not something that you're going to, like, I'll never forget when I used to go to Al-Anon, to recover from my dad's drinking, and realizing that just because I knew something about myself doesn't mean it was fixed. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, and so thinking about this as a practice of let joy be my default and not
Mhm. You make that's such a good point. There's like an intellectual knowing and then there's an emotional knowing.
Mhm.
And for those of us, especially if you're a woman who intellectualizes like you, like me,
All
like,
the women we work with
my gosh,
we're intellectualizers. Yes.
totally,
Keeps us
totally.
safe, right?
It does. It absolutely, by intellectualizing, it creates distance between ourselves and the problem.
Mhm.
However, knowing something is a problem is not a cure for being a problem. And what we have to do is sort of like, as we experience things and the feeling comes up right away of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or like anything that triggers like an emotional reaction, that's when we need to stop and deal with it in the moment. And that will also mean that we have to have exposure to those conditions that will trigger us. So we have like stepping out of our comfort zone
Mm-hmm.
and trying something different. It's not going to feel good,
Mm-hmm.
but if we can just try it a little bit and then deal with it as it comes up in the moment. And maybe that's through somatic therapy. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's also like doing other kind of like brain spotting or EMDR, things to sort of help us, reprocess
Mm-hmm.
and get back into our bodies and feel
Well, I
better.
also think that self-compassion is a pathway to this as well.
For sure.
This is how we undergird everything we do and
Mm-hmm.
every little aspect of Anne-Marie's coaching, but really in Lotus Community Coaching, which is our coaching program for women coming out later in life, we have really undergirded the program with these three pillars of
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion, which is self-kindness, shared common humanity, and mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
We use that in every aspect of our community. And so we really, really encourage our community members to notice when they're falling into the suffering trap. I should be suffering. I'm a bad person because I want something different. I'm a bad person because I want a divorce. I'm a bad person because I think I may need to move. All of those things. And ask them to notice it, which is mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that they're falling into that trap, that suffering trap.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to other people about it, because as Brene Brown says, when you share your thoughts and concerns and you douse it with empathy, it loses its power for you. That is why we do a group coaching model. And then give yourself some self kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of falling into this suffering trap, how can I be kind to myself in
Mm-hmm.
this moment?
And allowing yourself to feel all kinds of feelings. You may feel like you're suffering, or you may feel guilty, or you may feel joy. I personally think that we're here to feel all the feelings and
Mm-hmm.
not be afraid of them. And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned Brene Brown there, and there's an amazing anecdote that she says in one of her TED Talks about the man who diminished his own joy
Mm-hmm.
throughout his life and always sort of self-sabotaged his own joy because he was afraid that if the bottom fell out or something happened, then he would be really disappointed. And he would do that in his relationships. And then his wife got terminally ill and passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to Brene Brown, I wish I had leaned into the joy,
Mm-hmm.
because diminishing my enjoyment or my joy did not make it any less painful when she died. It
Mm.
was still painful.
That's really interesting, Barb. I love that. Mhm.
Pretty profound. So leaning into the feelings, whether they're hard, but also leaning into the joy as well, and accept that we are multifaceted people. We're not one-dimensional, and we're going to feel all the feels,
Mhm.
and we should.
And so that leads me to think of a question that we may ask ourselves. Where in our lives am I holding onto suffering
Mhm.
unnecessarily? I
Mhm.
gave you the example with my child.
Mhm.
Is there other places in your own life where you're holding on to suffering unnecessarily? And what would it feel like to release this belief?
Mhm.
That's like that old story about someone who kept carrying these rocks. He had a bag of rocks and he
Mhm.
kept carrying it on the hill and he kept adding more rocks in his bag and it kept getting heavier and heavier. And it wasn't until he was on the top of the hill he realized, why am I carrying these rocks? And then he put the rocks down.
Right, right?
So, are there any rocks that you need to put down right now that
Mhm.
is blocking your joy or is causing you to suffer unnecessarily? A lot of the times, those rocks often include stuff from our childhood or stuff
Mhm.
from our past stuff that people have told us. So when we choose to put down the rocks, we're able to feel joy because joy doesn't need to be justified. It's our birthright. It is our birthright.
Mhm.
Imagine if we grew up in a culture or we grew up in a religion where we believed that the highest power or the ultimate concern only wanted love and joy for us.
Mhm.
That is my ultimate concern. That
Mhm.
is what I believe in. And a long time ago, I stopped believing in other things. So let me give you an example. I don't believe in hell. Haven't believed in hell in 25 years because I realized that rock of hell was incompatible with the type of ultimate concern I believed in, which was an ultimate concern of a loving, vibrant energy of the universe that only wants us to feel joy and happiness.
Right.
My goodness, imagine if we had a faith that talked about that, then a faith that talks about suffer, 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 suffer.
Mhm. Mhm. And I mean, you're raising a good point too. It's like, what is worthy? Like,
Mhm.
so subjective, and it is impacted culturally. Like, we live in a very individualistic society. There are other places in the world where it's more about the group than it is about the individual.
Mhm.
And so the idea of worth and what is worthy is changeable. And I think what's important is to decide, what does that mean to you? And that means getting in touch with your values
Yes.
and what is important to you. Personally, I think, yes, everybody does have a baseline where we are just integrally by default of being a human on this earth. We are worthy of happiness and joy. And what makes a person worthy? Well, for me, I would answer that a person is worthy when they have integrity to themselves and to others. A person who conducts themselves honestly, somebody who's willing to keep working on themselves and learn from their mistakes. And also, like, that automatically allows for the grace of making mistakes because we're all going to make them.
Yes.
Dignity, upholding human rights. Like, those are the things for me personally that makes a person worthy. For other people, there might be variations on that theme. Certain things might be universal, but it can be different.
So, we have worked with a lot of women over the years, and we have seen that shift from survival mode to thriving.
Mhm.
It is when I'm thinking of so many different women that I have worked with. And now, I mean, individually and in the groups, I'm way into the mid hundreds, upper hundreds now. And then also people that contact me that have never really talked to me, but are on social media or follow the podcast who report things to me. And what it is that, first of all, being where they shift from survival mode to thriving is that they begin to become kind to themselves. Like, for example, Barb and I do a lot of work with women who have had catalysts. And what do we see with women, especially they're really suffering at the end of their catalyst relationship? What happens when they decide to let that relationship go?
Almost universally, it comes with shame,
Hmm.
a sense of loss, struggling with feelings of how did I get here, feelings of selfishness, feelings of what was this all for? And really often too, a very like sense of disconnectedness from self.
Well, because they are disconnected to themselves, because at that point, when people have a catalyst relationship, the person that they were, and they realize they're not as straight as they think they are, the person that they were no longer exists.
Mhm.
And so they have to accept that they are not straight.
Mhm.
Now, you can accept you're not straight and not have to come out. So I just want to be really clear about that.
Mhm.
But women have to get to a point of accepting that this relationship says something about themselves that they either were sort of aware of, really aware of, or didn't know at all. And so they have to get to a place of self-acceptance around everything that happened. And that's when the shift begins to happen, when they realize maybe this woman wasn't the love, like, isn't my long-term love, but she made me realize a lot about myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so when they are able to begin to let that relationship go, they begin to move towards thriving because they're like, "Oh, I might be able to find this with somebody else."
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. After, a period of healing and self-reflection, and often, well, I've radically changed my life. So what's next for me and what do I really want? And
right.
figuring that out.
And I've also found that it's when women also begin to let go that they have to suffer
Hmm.
able to have. I keep thinking of our client. I don't want to say any names, but she was from the northwestern corner of the United States, and she came to us. She had had a relationship. The husbands had given permission for them to have a relationship.
Yes.
Okay. And watching her shift from just total depression and confusion and beating herself up because she wanted something different to now being in a full relationship with somebody she adores.
Hmm.
And it was watching a tightly held bud.
Totally. Yes.
And the thing is we don't want to share people's stories because we really, they trust us with them. But Barb and I have had the opportunity to see so many women bloom over and over again. And if that is something you're desiring, we're really good gardeners. In fact, Barb's a real farmer.
Well, yes, I do like that. But it truly, this work, I feel I mean, it's not a job, it's a vocation.
Right.
It is something that I feel strongly compelled to do, and why I'm so grateful for the work that we do and the women that we work with. It is one of the singular joys of my life to watch a woman show up to our meetings over and over and over again. And historically, she comes and she's the weight of the
Yeah.
world,
You
just
it's like,
dragging her down. And then one day she
I
shows
know.
up to group and it's like she's like a whole new woman, and like the weight of the world just eventually gets lifted off of her. Except we won't say it gets lifted off of her, she lifts it off
It off of
herself
her.
through the work she does with us, with cultivating self-kindness, with
Other
compassion,
members in the group.
the community of the group, and seeing her story reflected in the stories of others, and then extending others grace as well, where she also deserves it. And
Mhm.
one day she shows up, you've seen this a million times.
Oh,
She
I
shows
talk
up
about it all the
with
time.
that
One
glow.
day they show up and they're glowing.
Yes, yes,
And and we always notice it because it's profound.
yes.
And so, I think that's the greatest honor of my life is to help people glow.
Right, right. I live for those
Really is.
moments. They
Yeah.
live for those moments.
And by the way, Bob and I are not the only people that notice it in the group. Everybody does, which
For
is really
sure.
yes.
For sure.
So we're going to recap right now. So suffering is a learned belief. It is not a requirement.
That's right.
You don't have to prove your worth through pain. And guess what? Joy is accessible now. You do not have to go through tons of hardship.
That's right. You
Just don't.
don't have to walk for miles on your knees.
Well, I'm going to end that today with that. So don't share that right now. So I have a real reflection for you. And if you need to help with figuring this out, we are here for you. Where in your life are you holding on to struggle? And what would happen if you allowed yourself to let it go? So we would really encourage you to join either Lotus Community Coaching, the link is on the bottom, or Authentically Us, that is our community that is on Mighty Networks, and we can continue the conversation on suffering and not suffering and joy in there. And to end this program today, I want to read you a poem by Mary Oliver. If you get any of my emails, on the bottom of my signature line, there is a quote from her. It says, "Tell me, what will you do with your one wild and precious life?" And that's from another poem of hers. But this poem today is called Wild Geese. Now, Mary Oliver was a lesbian. She lived in the lesbian mecca of Provincetown, Massachusetts. And her writing is some of the most profound I've ever read. And so I would like to read this poem, Wild Geese, to end this program today. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Wherever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
I love it.
So we're signing off now. Remember, joy is allowed. You are allowed to have joy. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Anne-Marie Zanzal.
And I'm Barb, and I thank you so much I think this was a really necessary conversation.
It was, and I'm really grateful we got to have it. Thank you, Barbara Rowlandson.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie Zanzal. You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.